like how he sugarcoated the way how Hitler oofed himself. Oversimplified part 2, World War II. Let's get in it.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community. Stick around until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for Oversimplified viewers. So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key...
Yes. So at this period of time, Barbados was still a British colony. And in fact, if you've watched one of my older reaction videos, I've mentioned how Barbados is known as Little England. This name, Little England, actually came from World War II, when the fall of France happened. I think I explained this in one of my other reaction videos, but I'll explain it here. I forgot who it was, but someone in our government, I think he ended up becoming a prime minister or something like that, sent a telegram. It was like a telegram or like a message or something like that to the UK. Basically, it was saying, like, keep carrying on. Little England is with you. And ever since then, everyone just kept the name as Little England for Barbados. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed a defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France...
Honorable campaign. Oh, that's such a subtle joke, oversimplified.
France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini...
It's interesting to me how the French keeps their colonial stranglehold over Africa, right? Maybe I'm using a bit of hindsight, but it's crazy to me how the Africans would rather stay under French rule, basically, rather than join the Germans. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy, man.
He had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine. So he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to...
Freaking oversimplified jokes, man. They're so corny. Like, oh...
All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe," and sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war.
Okay, hold on a minute. Let's see.
Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began...
Okay, so America was literally in an undeclared war against Germany. Like, I said this in my freaking World War II myths that you still believe in video. Go check it out. It's actually like a pretty insightful video. America was like really like poking at Germany, right? Even though they were supposed to be neutral, they were clearly not neutral. Like, clearly not neutral, like, at all, man. So I see a lot of people say, oh, why would freaking Hitler go and declare a war on the United States of America? Long story short, like, America and Germany were basically fighting a freaking war in the seas already. but it was very weird because Germany couldn't really like go all out against like American like shipping, because America was technically still not in the war, but America was like pushing more and more at Germany. So when Pearl Harbor happened, Germany was like, oh great, convenient, and thought, okay great, now I'm just gonna go all out, no more restrictions anymore. Now Japan is in the fight, and Mr. Schmittler thought that the Japanese Navy would have been more than enough to eventually just deal with the Allies, specifically invading the British Isles. So yeah,
began supplying the Allies with food and munitions. But there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats, improved...
And you know what? This is probably the only goddamn way Germany could have won World War II effectively. If they actually, like, really, well, there's a few possible more ways Germany could have won World War II. Like, I see people say, oh, it's impossible for Germany to win World War II. I wouldn't really necessarily say impossible. It was hard, but it was very much possible. Like, before the US joined, Germany had it actually, like, really, like, focus on their U-boat program, really, like, starve Britain out, right? And not only that, but there were a bunch of hiccups that also happened during the freaking Battle of the Atlantic and the U-boat campaign that really screwed the Germans over, that really lost in the Battle of the Atlantic, bro. Like, a lot of people don't talk about how important the Battle of the Atlantic was. I think I made a YouTube short about that, actually, freaking emphasizing how important that freaking battle was. But like most pop history people, they don't really talk about that.
Radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete. You take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. Then they tried to make a pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea.
Join large-scale battles with military
Oh, skip this part.
vehicles. The online action game War Thunder has received a major
Idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey,
With the help of a bunch of German missiles. Bro, Germany lost themselves World War II. Germany really lost themselves World War II when you really actually think about it.
that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell.
Okay, Yugoslavia actually joined the Axis for like 2 weeks. I think it was like 2 weeks or something. It was like a really short time. And then a coup happened, and then a pro-Allied government joined the freaking Allies, and then they got invaded. Very interesting scenario. Like, I always think, like, what if Yugoslavia stayed in the Axis? How would that, right, change the tide of the war, right? Think about that, dude. Because you have less resources in occupation. You have less ammunition, right? You have less manpower dealing with that, right? Think about that. And Yugoslavia was a pretty sizable country. Okay, pretty sizable country, man. Would they have invaded the Soviet Union with Germany? I don't know. Because I know Bulgaria, like, straight up, like, outright refused to invade, like, the Soviet Union despite being a part of the Axis. I really wonder, like, would Yugoslavia, like, how would that impact the Axis? Because a lot of people don't understand that the partisans, the Yugoslav partisans, the resistance, if you don't know what that means, they really gave the Germans a run for their money. Like, the Germans were spending so much resources, man, dealing with the partisans. And the Italians were also spending a bunch of resources dealing with that. So, like, imagine, right, you remove that problem in an alternate history scenario. Oh man, that's actually pretty goddamn cool to think about. Like,
fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance.
Okay, so the reason why Stalin was surprised, right? Stalin just didn't expect Germany to freaking start a war into France, okay? Stalin knew that a conflict with him and Germany were gonna happen, and in fact the Soviet Union was actually gonna invade Germany anyways. The only difference was that Germany decided to go on strike first. So yeah, that was what really surprised Stalin, because Stalin thought that as long as the UK is in the war, then he's not gonna attack me. So when he did attack him anyways, that completely surprised him. But I'm pretty sure had Germany and UK peace out, Stalin would have gone all in. They were Stalin was literally planning to invade Germany. They both did not trust each other at all. In fact, Stalin actually sent Hitler a invitation to join the Axis, but Mr. Schmittler never responded. And when Stalin didn't get that response, Stalin knew that eventually Germany was gonna betray him. So he was actually planning for it. He just didn't think it would come in this way. So that's, I don't know, misconception.
Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk.
Soviet troops, not Russian. Soviet. Okay? Russia was not a country here. This is the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That was literally the official name. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Not republic. Republics, meaning more than one. Stop saying Russia, man. Although I'm seeing more and more people starting to get that less confused, you know what I mean?
300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years.
It's so crazy to me how freaking the Soviets did not outright collapse, especially those mind-boggling encirclements, dude. Oh, it is really crazy.
Invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift." "Perfectly normal, keep going." Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then Stalin...
Okay. The winter did affect the Germans, yes. But the winter also helped the Germans in a way. Because before the winter happened, there was the Russian summer. And when I'm saying the Russian summer, I mean the region, right? That region in general. And then there was Rasputitsa. Rasputitsa, the mud, the wet season. Oh, that was what really hampered the German advance before the freaking winter came. And then when the winter came, the snow actually froze the roads, so it actually made it much more easier for vehicles and tanks to drive from the previous Rasputitsa, the mud that was making it super difficult, and sometimes whole vehicles would get stuck in the road, you know what I mean? So the winter did happen to Germans, but like it wasn't like as bad as like the Russian summer and wet season. That was what really messed with the Germans. Like if the Russian wet season and summer didn't really come, Germany probably would have finished off the Soviet Union there.
Called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China...
So, the Soviet counteroffensive, he completely glossed over the fact that Mr. Schmittler actually gave a stand fast order, which literally saved the entire German army in 1941 when the Soviets were doing their offensive, actually. So he didn't even credit, Mr. Schmittler for that. Because people like to say that, oh, Mr. Schmittler was a bad general, he didn't know what he was doing, but he knew what he was doing.
China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big...
I already freaking explained why he did that. Yeah.
Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon.
Or the aircraft carriers. And I'm glad that he mentioned the submarines, because a lot of people don't know about the 1944 US submarine campaign against Japan. That was what killed the Japanese Empire. It was Midway, yes. Midway was like when everything slowly started to go freaking downhill for the Japanese. But the US submarine campaign of 1944, that was what really killed the Japanese. Like the US just completely just decimated Japanese freaking trading routes, man. Because again, the Japanese Empire was like, it was a maritime empire, you know? So freaking disrupt that and boom, boom. And that's what happened. Basically, what Mr. Schmittler wanted to do with Britain, America did to Japan with their submarines. And in fact, Japan even lost a lot of big ships because of submarines, but that's a whole different video.
Soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
Enlisted is the free brand new online World War II shooter. Command a squad of soldiers and participate.
For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach...
Oh boy, Stalingrad, the most freaking talked about battle. If you're a fake history buff, everyone knows about this battle. I don't know. Let's see what I have to say about this.
and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time.
Ooh, 5 months, man. Stalingrad was crazy, though. I mean, that's why everyone talks about it. God damn.
When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft.
There's also something else that I should mention. The Germans technically did took the city, but like by the time they took the city, like the Soviets, we all know what happens.
And getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the Sixth Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe..."
Okay, so let's talk about this, shall we? The Germans could have prevented Operation Uranus from happening, the encirclement of Stalingrad. In fact, the Soviet operation around Moscow, because Operation Uranus wasn't the only operation happening around this time. Operation Mars, it was actually a way worse operation, right? Operation Mars is technically like a much more bigger deal than Operation Uranus, but still Operation Mars didn't go anywhere because in the Moscow set, the Germans actually got their like reinforcements and like refills basically, but in the Stalingrad, again, man, terrible mismanagement by the German high command. The Romanians and the Hungarians were begging for heavy weapons, and they just didn't get them. Seriously. Not only that, but the Romanians and Hungarians literally saw the buildup. They literally saw the Soviet buildup of Operation freaking Uranus or Uranus. And the German high commanders kind of just like did nothing at all. Like it's stupid. Again, the Germans lost themselves the war. Like, seriously, the Germans lost themselves the war.
"Maybe we should retreat," but Hitler said, "No, you stay."
Technically, this was actually a good idea on Mrs. Schmittler's part, and here's why. Stalingrad did keep up a lot of the Soviet troops, okay? That's true. Operation Uranus was not an operation to encircle Stalingrad. Operation Uranus was an operation to cut off the entire German army group south, in the Caucasus, and destroy them. That didn't happen. In fact, some historians even argue that Operation Uranus was a missed opportunity. Yes, it destroyed the Germans in Stalingrad, but the German army in the Caucasus, they were able to withdraw intact. In fact, the German army, you know what? I don't know. Should I say this? I'm just gonna say the German army after the Battle of Stalingrad happened was actually withdrawing intact for the most part until 1944. Let's see what he says first.
The entire Sixth Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe.
I already say air superiority. In some sectors, the Soviets were still getting destroyed. Like the Southern Front after the Stalingrad happened, they were set back, and you could like see this in the front lines of 1944. Like you could still see that, like in the center and the Northern Front, they were basically like in the same position, but the Southern Front was completely like pushed back. But still, let's see what he says.
Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rome.
Oh yeah. That was another reason why Germany lost the war. Those American bombings, they got so bad that the Germans had to keep like, I think 30% of the Luftwaffe. The 30% of the Luftwaffe, I think, just to protect Germany from those freaking Allied freaking bombing raids. So Germany wasn't even using its air force in full capacity because they had freaking Allied bombings that was completely like destroying their industry.
Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also...
So let's talk about the North African campaign. The North African campaign, again, another blunder by Germany. Rommel didn't get his reinforcements at El Alamein. So that was bound to fail. You know, that was like really, really bound to fail. Like, freaking, had Germany took El Alamein, they would have been able to completely destroy the Suez Canal. If not, they would have been able to at least get access to Iraq and Iraq's oil. Because Iraq, at this point, they were still producing oil. In fact, I think the British had like a monopoly or something over that. Could be wrong. But Iraq was actually a part of the Axis. Iraq actually joined the Axis powers. But again, no one could help them. No one could help them. So, freaking, yeah, they were invaded shortly and occupied. But, yeah, I feel like if Germany had taken El Alamein, they probably could have won the war using the oil in Iraq, in my personal opinion. Because number one, there was actually a point in time where the Germans, the Axis, I should say, because this involves Italy, but like the Axis actually had naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. Because a lot of people say that, oh yes, Britain got complete naval supremacy, yada yada. Yes, that's true, but you have to remember that Britain was completely stretched. Like Britain was completely stretched. Like really stretched, because they had to protect like so many other places, and they had to deal with so many other like threats like Japan and whatnot. And not only that, but Vichy France, right? Vichy France was a very lingering and problematic, especially what Churchill did at Mers El Kabir. Yeah, Vichy France is increasingly more and more hostile towards the British, right? So a lot of people don't really talk about the North African campaign, but in my personal opinion, had the North African campaign gone well for the Axis, and cutting off the Suez Canal would have cut off Britain from her main ally, India. That would have completely messed with British trade. Maybe even forcing them to sue for peace. So, you gotta think about that, man. Like, I see all these people talking about all this stuff, like, oh, what if Mr. Schmittler wants Stalingrad? Or, oh, what if he invented some stupid weapon? Or some stupidness like that, man. But it's like, dude, there's so many other ways that Germany could have, like, pulled things off, but oh well, the God didn't want that to happen. Like, it's just comically hilarious how Germany just sold themselves the war, the more you think about it.
Already seeing its rapid success being turned around, they attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the
Japanese carrier fleet would never recover from that, yes.
Harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. Alright, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. Alright, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock.
Wikipedia screenshot because I'm lazy.
Producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before, invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception.
Oh my gosh. This right here is going to be the biggest L the biggest, I want to curse, but I can't curse. This is going to be the biggest mess up that Germany has done. Let's see what he says.
Protection tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses.
Then you want to know something? Wait. I'm gonna let him finish.
While paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came. As Allies...
God damn it, man.
EVE Online on Mac immerses you in a universe.
Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the...
Alright, so D-Day. The Germans could have stopped D-Day. The Germans literally could have stopped D-Day. Again, the German high command... Like, even when the Allies had landed and they had the beachheads, they could have stopped D-Day. But the mismanagement by the freaking German high command, dude. I think at one point, was it Sword Beach? I think it was at Sword Beach. I could be wrong, but I think it was at Sword Beach where a German panzer group actually did a counter attack. And they actually pushed the Allies all the way back to the beaches. But they didn't have their reinforcements. The Germans just did not send any reinforcements to the beachhead, at all. Even when they should have, they just did not. Literally, if they were using their brains, because yes, they were deceived, but still, when everyone knew that okay, this was at Normandy, when that German panzer group did their counterattack, and they actually pushed, I think it was at Sword Beach, they actually pushed all the way back to the beach, and they couldn't even completely pushed them out because they didn't have their infantry reinforcements. Nothing came, so they were eventually forced back. They were eventually just forced back. So it's crazy.
Port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese.
Dude, these casualties are literally insane, dude. These islands, man. My population of my country is 280,000 people. Bro, these islands are literally smaller than Barbados, right? And the population, the deaths, the casualties that they were facing, mad, dude. And these islands are smaller than Barbados. And they were literally, the casualties are literally comparable to the population of Barbados, dude. Japanese really fought hard.
Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I've just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender?"
You want to know something crazy about this? Like, the Germans at this point, right? Their air force was just, should I even call that an air force? What was left of their air force? Okay, the Luftwaffe. I think they did an operation for this as well. Operation Bodenplatte. Yeah, Operation Bodenplatte or table plate, something like that. When it involved a lot of planes for this. When the Germans on the ground saw like all of these planes like flying, right? Freaking. Oh my gosh. They thought it was Allied planes. Because at this point of the war, the Germans were just so used to the German Air Force just basically not existing. So when they finally saw it, they thought it was Allied planes and they opened fired. They opened fired. Bloody hell, the sun is so bloody bright, man. Bloody hell. Gotta cover my face. But when they saw that, they thought it was freaking Allied planes and open fires. It was actually like pretty wow.
No, sir, they want us to surrender. Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it,
I like how he sugarcoated the way how Hitler oofed himself.
Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima.
I'm gonna oversimplify for pointing that out because yeah, that was one of the main reasons why freaking like they used the nukes, even though the nukes weren't the reasons why Japan surrendered.
Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After
What? Why didn't he talk about the Soviets invading Manchuria? What?
6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the two of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one. Wow, Churchill, that looks just like...
Nice. Check out these videos that are appearing on your screen. If you enjoy my takes, check out my other reactions, man, because I have some very good takes on history. I have some very passionate takes on history. Subscribe if you like my content for more content. Comment your opinion. You know what I mean, man. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like.